"Let go of my father, and I'll make you walk." The court laughed, until the impossible happened. A little girl's promise shattered a judge's arrogance and revealed a truth that would change everything forever. The fluorescent lights of courtroom 7B hummed like a swarm of invisible wasps, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow that made even healthy people look halfway to the grave. Emma Sullivan's hand trembled against the brass door handle, cold metal that felt like ice against her palm, despite the summer heat outside. She had to stand on her tiptoes to reach it properly. 9 years old, and already she understood that some doors were designed to keep people like her out. She took a breath that hurt going down. Behind her, she could hear the squeak of wheelchair wheels on linoleum, the sound of metal restraints clinking, the heavy footsteps of the 2 bailiffs, who were bringing her father into the building like he was some kind of dangerous criminal, instead of a man who could barely lift a glass of water without his hands shaking. Emma pushed the door open. The courtroom didn't go quiet all at once. First, a lawyer in an expensive suit stopped mid-sentence, his eyes landing on her with the kind of surprise you'd see if a stray dog had wandered in. Then a woman in pearls elbowed the man next to her, whispering something behind her hand. Then another person turned, and another. The silence spread like spilled water, soaking into every corner of the room until the only sound was that horrible fluorescent hum and the squeaking of her father's wheelchair. Emma wore the only dress she owned, a faded pink thing that had once belonged to someone else's daughter, sold at a thrift store for $3. She'd washed it in the sink that morning because the laundromat cost money they didn't have. It was still slightly damp in places, clinging to her thin shoulders. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a ponytail that she'd done herself, using the elastic hair tie she'd been wearing for 6 months because the package of new ones cost $1.50 and there was never $1.50 for things like that. She walked down the center aisle, and every eye in the room followed her. And then they wheeled her father in, and Emma heard someone gasp. Robert Sullivan looked like death, wearing a prison jumpsuit. He'd lost so much weight that the orange fabric hung on him like a tent, the sleeves swallowing his wrists, the collar gaping around a neck that had become all cords and tendons. His face was gray, not pale but actually gray like ash, and covered with a sheen of sweat, even though the courtroom was heavily air-conditioned. His hands rested on the wheelchair's armrests, but they weren't still. They trembled with a constant visible shake that made the metal restraints around his wrists rattle softly. But it was his eyes that destroyed Emma every time she saw him. Those eyes had once been bright with laughter, crinkled at the corners from smiling too much. They'd been the eyes that watched her take her first steps, that lit up every time she brought home a good grade, that filled with proud tears at her 3rd grade chorus concert when she'd forgotten half the words, but sang the parts she remembered as loud as she could. Now those eyes were hollow, sunken deep in his skull, ringed with dark circles that looked like bruises, and filled with a pain so profound, so absolute, that Emma sometimes thought it would have been kinder if they'd just been empty. "Daddy," she whispered, the word catching in her throat. Robert's trembling hand lifted slightly, reaching for her before one of the bailiffs, a heavy-set man with no expression at all, pushed it back down. "No contact with the defendant, miss." The defendant. Her father was the defendant, the man who'd taught her to read by sounding out street signs during their walks, who'd made her breakfast every morning even when he was so tired from working 2 jobs that he could barely keep his eyes open, who'd sold his car, their only car, to pay for her school supplies and new shoes, when her feet grew 2 sizes in one summer. That man was the defendant. Emma's fingernails dug into her palms hard enough to hurt. She wanted to scream, wanted to run to him, to throw her arms around him, to somehow shield him from all of this. But she'd promised him she'd be strong. She'd promised she wouldn't make things worse. So she walked to the front row of the gallery and sat down on a wooden bench that was harder and colder than any furniture had a right to be. Across the aisle, 3 rows back, a woman sat clutching a tissue. Margaret Chen, Mrs. Chen as Emma had always called her, was 71 years old, a retired librarian who'd lived in the same rent-controlled apartment as Emma and her father for the past 5 years. She'd been the one watching Emma these past months since Robert's arrest. She'd been the one making sure Emma got to school, ate something resembling meals, had clean clothes to wear. Mrs. Chen's eyes were already red from crying, and the trial hadn't even started yet. "All rise!" Everyone stood except Robert, who couldn't. and Emma, who stared straight ahead with her jaw clenched so tight her teeth ached. Judge Victor Sterling entered from his chambers. He moved like a man who'd never doubted his right to occupy any space he chose. 61 years old, with silver hair styled perfectly, a face that looked like it had been carved from expensive marble, and the kind of bearing that came from 3 generations of wealth and privilege. His black robe flowed behind him like a cape. His shoes, visible beneath the robe, were polished to a mirror shine. Everything about Victor Sterling screamed power. He settled into his leather chair, a chair that was notably more comfortable than anything else in the courtroom, and his eyes swept across the room with the casual assessment of someone inventorying his possessions. When his gaze landed on Robert, something flickered across his face. Not sympathy, not even recognition of shared humanity. It was the expression someone might make when they stepped in something unpleasant on the sidewalk. Disgust mixed with annoyance at the inconvenience. "Well," Sterling said, his voice resonant and carrying easily through the courtroom. "Mr. Sullivan, I see you've managed to join us today, despite your condition." The pause before condition was deliberate, pointed. It transformed a medical reality into something shameful, something Robert had somehow brought upon himself through moral failing. Emma's hands clenched harder. A small drop of blood welled up where her nail had broken skin. Robert's voice, when he finally spoke, was barely audible. "Yes, Your Honor." "Speak up, Mr. Sullivan. The court reporter needs to hear you." "Yes, Your Honor," Robert repeated, louder this time, and the effort it took made his whole body shake harder. A muscle spasm ran through his right leg, clearly visible even through the jumpsuit, and his face contorted in pain that he tried desperately to hide. Sterling watched this display with the detached interest of someone observing a mildly interesting insect. "Are you quite finished?" "I'm sorry, Your Honor." I don't have control." Yes. We're all aware of your medical situation, Mr. Sullivan. Let's move forward, shall we? Some of us have other commitments today." Sterling glanced at the expensive watch on his wrist, a movement calculated to be seen. "I have a dinner reservation at 7. I'd prefer not to be late." Somewhere in the gallery, someone chuckled. A quiet sound of agreement that said yes. This dying man in a wheelchair should definitely hurry up so the judge wouldn't miss his dinner reservation. Benjamin Crawford, the prosecutor, rose to his feet with the smooth confidence of someone who'd already won. He was 43, with the kind of tan that came from weekend golf games at exclusive clubs, wearing a suit that cost more than most people made in a month. His smile was professionally warm, the kind that never quite reached his eyes but looked convincing from a distance. "Your Honor, the state is ready to proceed with the case against Robert Sullivan. The charges are felony fraud, embezzlement of client funds totaling $247,000, and aggravated theft from vulnerable victims." Each word landed like a stone thrown at a man who couldn't dodge. Emma watched her father's shoulders hunch forward, watched him shrink into himself, watched the last fragments of his dignity being stripped away in front of a room full of strangers. "How does the defendant plead?" Sterling asked, not looking at Robert but at some papers on his bench. Joseph Kim stood up. He was Robert's court-appointed attorney, 32 years old, wearing a suit that didn't quite fit right, carrying a briefcase held together with duct tape that he probably thought nobody noticed. He'd graduated from a mid-tier law school 6 years ago, and had been carrying crushing student debt ever since. This was maybe his 20th case, possibly his 30th. Definitely not enough to go up against someone like Crawford. "Not guilty, Your Honor," Kim said, his voice wavering slightly. "My client maintains his complete innocence of all charges." "Of course he does," Sterling said, with the weary tone of someone who'd heard this all before and didn't believe a word of it. "Mr. Crawford, please present your opening statement." Crawford walked to the center of the courtroom, positioning himself where every eye would naturally fall. He'd done this hundreds of times. He was good at it. "Your Honor, members of the court," Crawford began, his voice pitched perfectly to sound both authoritative and sympathetic. "This is a case about betrayal, about a man who was given trust and chose to destroy it, about families who worked their entire lives to save money, only to have it stolen by someone they believed was helping them." Emma felt her stomach twist. Robert Sullivan was an accountant at Henderson & Associates Financial Services, For 18 months, he systematically transferred money from client accounts into offshore accounts under false names. $247,000. Gone. Crawford let that number hang in the air. The victims include an 80-year-old widow who lost her entire retirement savings, a young couple who'd spent 8 years saving for their first home, a disabled veteran trying to put his daughter through college. Crawford's voice took on a note of righteous anger. Mr. Sullivan didn't steal from nameless corporations. He stole from real people, people who trusted him, people who could least afford to lose what they'd worked so hard to save. That's not true. The words came out of Emma's mouth before she could stop them. Quiet, but in the silent courtroom they carried clearly. Every head turned. Sterling's eyes found her, and they were cold. Young lady, you will remain silent in this courtroom, or you will be removed. Do you understand? Emma understood. She understood that nobody cared about the truth, that nobody was listening to her father, that the system her father had told her to trust was a system designed to crush people like them. But she nodded anyway, because what choice did she have? Crawford smiled, a quick, satisfied smile that he hid almost immediately, and continued. The evidence is overwhelming, Your Honor. We have bank transfer records showing Sullivan's access to the accounts. We have emails from his work computer outlining the transfers. We have testimony from his colleagues that he was the only person with the security clearances necessary to make these particular transfers. Kim stood up, his hands shaking slightly as he clutched a notepad. Your Honor, the defense would like to note that those emails were never— Sit down, Mr. Kim, Sterling said without looking at him. You'll have your chance after the state has finished. If you keep interrupting, I'll hold you in contempt. Kim sat down, his face flushing red. Crawford walked closer to the judge's bench, lowering his voice into something that sounded almost compassionate. Furthermore, Your Honor, we must address the elephant in the room. Mr. Sullivan has been diagnosed with progressive neurological deterioration. His doctors have given him— Crawford paused, glancing at Robert with an expression that was probably meant to look sympathetic, but came across as condescending. Approximately 1 year to live, perhaps less. Emma heard Mrs. Chen stifle a sob behind her. The state's position, Crawford continued, is that Mr. Sullivan committed these crimes out of desperation. A dying man, desperate to leave something for his daughter. It's understandable from a human perspective. My daddy would never. Emma was on her feet before she realized she was moving. He wouldn't steal. He's not a thief. Bailiff, Sterling snapped. A hand landed on Emma's shoulder, heavy, firm, pulling her back down onto the bench. She looked up at the bailiff, seeing nothing in his face except the blank professionalism of someone who'd learned not to care. Emma, please. Her father's voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through everything else. Please, baby, don't make this harder. Please. She looked at him and felt something inside her chest crack open. He was crying. Not the quiet tears of sadness, but the desperate, helpless crying of a man who'd lost everything and was now watching the last person he loved in the world being dragged into his nightmare. His whole body shook with it, partly the disease, partly the grief, until Emma couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. I'm sorry, Daddy, Emma whispered, sitting back down. I'm sorry. As I was saying, Crawford continued smoothly, as if the interruption had been nothing more than a minor hiccup. The state believes Mr. Sullivan acted out of desperation, but understanding his motivation doesn't excuse his actions. The law is clear. He stole money that wasn't his. He must face the consequences. Sterling nodded slowly. Mr. Kim, do you have anything to say before we proceed to the evidence? Kim stood up again, and Emma could see his hands trembling as he held his notes. Your Honor, my client is innocent. Yes, money was transferred from those accounts. Yes, the transfers originated from computers that Mr. Sullivan had access to, but he didn't make those transfers. Someone else did. Someone who deliberately framed my client. The courtroom erupted in laughter. Not quiet chuckles, not polite expressions of doubt, but actual, genuine laughter. The kind that mocked and diminished and destroyed. Sterling didn't even bother hiding his smile. Mr. Kim, are you seriously suggesting there's some mysterious third party who went through all this trouble to frame your client? Yes, Your Honor. And who might this mystery person be? Kim's face went red. We're still investigating. So you have no name, no evidence, no witnesses, no proof of any kind. Your Honor, if we could just have more time to— Mr. Kim, this court does not grant continuances based on wild speculation and fantasy. If you have evidence, present it. If you don't, sit down and let's proceed with this trial. Kim sat down. Emma watched the defeat settle over him like a heavy blanket, watched him shrink back into his chair, watched the last flicker of hope die in his eyes, and she realized that her father was going to lose, not because he was guilty, but because nobody in this room cared about the truth. Crawford was presenting evidence now. Thick folders of bank statements, printouts of emails, charts showing the money trail. Everything was professional, organized, damning. Kim tried to object, tried to point out inconsistencies, tried to raise questions about the evidence. But Sterling overruled him every time, his voice growing increasingly annoyed, until finally he snapped, "Mr. Kim, if you interrupt one more time without valid cause, I will fine you for contempt. Am I making myself clear?" "Yes, Your Honor," Kim whispered. Emma looked at the faces in the courtroom, saw the jury box, empty for now, since this was just a preliminary hearing, but soon to be filled with 12 people who would decide her father's fate. Saw the gallery, filled with people who'd come to watch a dying man be publicly destroyed. Saw the court reporter typing mechanically, her face showing nothing. Saw the bailiffs, standing like statues. And she saw Judge Victor Sterling, sitting in his elevated chair, looking down at all of them, with the absolute certainty of someone who'd never been wrong, never been challenged, never been forced to question his own righteousness. Crawford was wrapping up his opening statement. "Your Honor, the state will prove beyond any reasonable doubt that Robert Sullivan is guilty of all charges.
We will show that he had motive, means, and opportunity. We will show that he acted deliberately and systematically. And we will show that justice demands he be held accountable for his crimes." "Thank you, Mr. Crawford," Sterling said. "Very thorough, as always." Then Sterling turned to Robert, and his expression shifted into something that might have been pity if it hadn't been mixed with so much contempt. "Mr. Sullivan, I want you to understand something. This court has seen many defendants, some innocent, some guilty, some who made mistakes out of desperation, some who acted out of pure greed. I pride myself on being able to tell the difference." Robert's hands gripped the wheelchair armrests, his knuckles white with the effort of holding on. "And when I look at you," Sterling continued, his voice taking on a lecturing tone, "I see a man who made a choice. A bad choice, certainly. A choice born from desperation, perhaps, but a choice nonetheless. You chose to steal. You chose to betray the trust placed in you. And now you're sitting in that wheelchair." Sterling gestured dismissively at the wheelchair, as if it were a prop Robert had brought to garner sympathy, trying to make this court feel sorry for you, trying to use your medical condition as an excuse for your criminal behavior. "Your Honor, I never—" Robert's voice broke. "I never stole anything. Please, I'm telling you the truth. I'm innocent. Mr. Sullivan, every guilty person who's ever sat in that chair has claimed to be innocent. The difference is that most of them have the dignity not to bring their children into court to watch them lie." The words hit Emma like a physical blow. Robert's face crumpled. "Please don't. She's just a child. Please don't punish her for—" "I'm not punishing her, Mr. Sullivan. You are. You're the one who stole money. You're the one who's going to prison. You're the one who's leaving your daughter without a father. Don't blame this court for the consequences of your own actions." And that's when something inside Emma snapped. She stood up slowly, and this time, when the bailiff reached for her shoulder, she shrugged off his hand and walked forward, down the aisle, past the gallery, past the prosecutor's table, where Crawford watched with amused interest. She walked right up to the barrier separating the gallery from the court itself. "You're wrong," she said, her voice quiet, but carrying clearly in the dead silence that had fallen over the room. Sterling's eyebrows rose. "Excuse me? You're wrong about my daddy. You're wrong about what happened. You're wrong about everything. Young lady, I have already warned you. I know what you did." The words fell into the courtroom like stones into still water. Sterling's expression shifted. Just for a fraction of a second, Emma saw something flicker across his face. Confusion, concern, fear.
Then it was gone, replaced by cold anger. I beg your pardon? Emma's heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat, in her ears, in her fingertips. But she'd started now, and there was no going back. I know about the accident, she said. I know about the car crash. I know about the woman who died. And I know that you were the one driving. The courtroom exploded. People gasped. Someone shouted, "Mrs." Chen made a sound like all the air had been knocked out of her lungs. Crawford jumped to his feet, his face showing genuine shock for the first time. Kim's mouth fell open. And Sterling's face went white. "That's enough." His voice cracked across the room like a whip. "Bailiff, remove this child immediately. She is clearly disturbed and—" "It was 17 years ago," Emma continued, speaking faster now, before they could drag her away. "November. You were driving drunk. You hit another car. A woman died. Her name was Sarah Mitchell. She had 2 children. She was 28 years old." "Security!" Sterling was standing now, his composure shattered. "Get her out of here! This is completely inappropriate. This is—" "You covered it up," Emma said, and now her voice was shaking, but she pushed through. "Someone helped you cover it up, made it look like someone else was driving. But it was you. It was always you." The bailiff had Emma by both shoulders now, lifting her off her feet, carrying her toward the door. But she kept talking, kept shouting, kept making sure every single person in that courtroom heard her. "And my daddy found out. That's why someone framed him. That's why he's here. Because he discovered the truth and someone wanted to destroy him before he could tell anyone." "This is absurd!" Sterling was shouting now, all pretense of judicial calm gone. "This child is clearly delusional, Mr. Sullivan. You should be ashamed of yourself, coaching your daughter to make such vile accusations." "I didn't coach her," Robert's voice rang out, stronger than Emma had heard it in months. "I don't know what she's talking about. Emma, what are you—" But Emma was being carried through the doors now, the bailiff's grip painfully tight on her arms. The last thing she saw before the doors closed was her father's face, a mixture of confusion, fear, and something else. Hope. Just a flicker of it. Just the tiniest spark. But it was there. The doors slammed shut, cutting off the chaos inside the courtroom. The bailiff set Emma down in the hallway, keeping one hand on her shoulder to make sure she didn't run back inside. "What the hell was that?" he asked. And for the first time, there was actual emotion in his voice. Shock. Confusion. Emma's whole body was shaking. She'd just accused a federal judge of vehicular manslaughter and a cover-up. She'd just destroyed any chance her father had of getting a fair trial. She'd just made everything so much worse. But she'd also just planted a seed of doubt in every single person in that courtroom. And seeds could grow. Inside, she could hear Sterling's voice, muffled by the doors but still clearly furious. She could hear him declaring a recess, demanding someone find out who this child was and how she'd gotten such ridiculous ideas. The bailiff's radio crackled. A voice came through, tinny and official. "Social services en route. Detain the minor until they arrive." Emma looked up at the bailiff. He was younger than she'd first thought, maybe 35, with kind eyes that looked tired and conflicted. "Is it true?" he asked quietly. "What you said about the judge?" Emma reached into the pocket of her damp dress and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She'd been carrying it for 3 weeks, ever since she'd found it in her father's old work files. A newspaper clipping from 17 years ago, a police report that had been altered, a medical examiner's finding that didn't quite match the official story, and a photograph of Judge Victor Sterling dated 2 days before the accident, shaking hands with the police chief at a charity fundraiser. The bailiff looked at the papers, and his eyes went wide. "Oh my God," he whispered. "Oh my God, it's true. It's actually true." Emma nodded, tucking the papers back into her pocket. "My daddy didn't steal anything. He was investigating the judge. Someone found out and framed him to shut him up." "But who would—" The bailiff stopped, understanding crossing his face. "Someone powerful. Someone with connections. Someone who didn't want the truth to come out." The courtroom doors burst open. Sterling emerged, his face flushed red, his eyes wild. He saw Emma standing there and pointed at her with a shaking finger. "I want that child arrested. She just slandered a federal judge. I want her charged with—" "Your Honor," Crawford had followed Sterling out, and his face was pale. "Your Honor, we need to talk. Privately. Right now." Sterling turned on him. "What are you—" "Now, Your Honor." Crawford's voice was urgent, low, scared. Sterling looked at Crawford, then at Emma, then back at Crawford. Whatever he saw in the prosecutor's face made him pause. "My chambers," Sterling said tightly. 5 minutes. He stormed off down the hallway, his robe billowing behind him. Crawford looked at Emma for a long moment. Then he leaned close to the bailiff and whispered something Emma couldn't hear. The bailiff nodded slowly. Crawford disappeared after Sterling, and Emma stood in the hallway, her heart still pounding, her dress still damp, her hands still shaking. She'd just declared war on one of the most powerful men in the state. She was 9 years old, and somehow, impossibly, she'd just changed everything. Inside the courtroom, through the still open doors, Emma could see her father. He was staring at the spot where she'd been standing, his face showing 1,000 emotions all at once. Mrs. Chen appeared beside him, her hand on his shoulder, saying something Emma couldn't hear. And Joseph Kim was frantically typing on his laptop, his expression shifting from shocked to determined. The bailiff's radio crackled again. "Social services 15 minutes out." The bailiff looked down at Emma. "Kid, you just stepped in something way bigger than you understand." Emma met his eyes. "I know exactly what I stepped in. That's why I did it. They're going to try to discredit you. Say you're lying. Say your father put you up to it. Let them try." The bailiff shook his head slowly, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth despite everything. "You're either the bravest kid I've ever met or the craziest. Can't I be both?" He laughed, a short, surprised sound. Yeah, I guess you can." Down the hallway, voices rose behind the closed door of Sterling's chambers. Sharp, angry, afraid. The truth was loose now, and Emma wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. She had a promise to keep. "Let go of my father, and I'll make you walk." Nobody understood what she'd meant. Not yet, but they would. Soon. The hallway outside courtroom 7B smelled like industrial cleaner and fear. Emma sat on a metal bench that was too high for her feet to touch the ground, her legs swinging slightly as she clutched the folded papers in her pocket. The bailiff, his name tag read Officer Marcus Webb, stood a few feet away, speaking quietly into his radio while watching her with an expression that kept shifting between concern and disbelief. Through the courtroom doors, Emma could still hear raised voices. Sterling's chambers must have inadequate soundproofing, because every few seconds a shout would break through the general murmur. She caught fragments. "Absolutely absurd. Check the records. Destroy that child's credibility." Webb ended his radio call and walked over to her. He was younger than most of the other bailiffs, maybe 35, with kind eyes that reminded Emma of her third-grade teacher, the one who'd noticed when Emma came to school without lunch and quietly started packing an extra sandwich. "Social services is delayed," he said, sitting down beside her. The bench creaked under his weight. "Traffic accident on the expressway. They're saying maybe 45 minutes. Emma nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Now that the adrenaline was wearing off, she could feel her whole body starting to shake. She'd just accused a federal judge of vehicular manslaughter and a cover-up in front of a courtroom full of people. She'd just painted a target on her back so big that even she couldn't believe her own courage, or stupidity. The line between the two seemed pretty thin right now. "Can I ask you something?" The bailiff's voice was quiet, careful. "Those papers you showed me, where did you get them?" Emma's hand tightened on her pocket. "My daddy's files. He kept everything from work in boxes in our apartment. After they arrested him, I started going through them, trying to understand what happened, trying to find proof that he didn't do what they said he did. And you found proof about Judge Sterling instead. I found a lot of things." Emma looked up at him, studying his face for signs of dismissal or condescension, but she only saw genuine curiosity. "My daddy was an accountant, but he was also really good at noticing patterns, things that didn't add up. He had this saying, 'Numbers don't lie, but people do. When the numbers and the story don't match, follow the numbers.'" Officer Webb smiled slightly. "Smart man." "The smartest," Emma said, and felt her throat tighten. "He didn't steal anything. I know everyone thinks he did. I know the evidence looks bad, but someone set him up." "Who?" That was the question, wasn't it? The one question Emma couldn't fully answer yet. She had pieces, fragments of a puzzle that she was still trying to put together. But the complete picture remained frustratingly out of reach. "I don't know exactly," Emma admitted, "but it has something to do with what my daddy found out about Judge Sterling, about the accident, about who helped cover it up." The courtroom doors burst open. Benjamin Crawford emerged, his face pale and tight with barely controlled anger. He was followed by Joseph Kim, who looked like someone had just told him he'd won the lottery and been diagnosed with a terminal illness at the same time. Shocked, afraid, but also strangely hopeful. Crawford's eyes landed on Emma, and the look he gave her was pure venom. "You," he said, pointing at her with a trembling finger. "You have no idea what you've just done." Officer Webb stood up immediately, positioning himself between Crawford and Emma. "Mr. Crawford, I'm going to have to ask you to step back. That child just committed slander in open court. She just accused a sitting federal judge of a crime with absolutely no evidence. I want her charged. I want her." "Mr. Crawford," Kim's voice was quiet, but firm, "I think you need to calm down." Crawford spun on him. "Calm down? Did you not just hear what she said in there? Did you not witness her make completely unfounded accusations against—" "Were they unfounded?" Kim asked, and there was something new in his voice, something sharp and certain that hadn't been there before. "Because I just spent 20 minutes watching Judge Sterling's face while you questioned him in chambers, and I've been a lawyer long enough to know what guilt looks like." Crawford's face went from pale to red. "You can't possibly believe." "I believe there are questions that need to be answered." Kim turned to Officer Webb. "Has social services arrived yet?" "Delayed. Traffic." "Good." Kim knelt down in front of Emma, bringing himself to her eye level. "Emma, I need you to tell me everything. Every single thing you know. Can you do that?" Emma looked past him at Crawford, who was practically vibrating with rage. Then she looked back at Kim and saw something she recognized. The expression her father used to get when he was working on a particularly difficult accounting problem. Focused, determined, refusing to give up until he found the answer. "Not here," Emma said. "Too many people listening." Kim glanced around the hallway. Several other people had emerged from the courtroom. Curious onlookers, court staff, a few lawyers who'd been in the gallery. All of them were watching with undisguised interest. "There's a conference room on the second floor," Officer Webb said. "Small, private. I can take you there." Crawford stepped forward. "Absolutely not. That child is in custody. She's not going anywhere without supervision from—" "I'll be supervising," Officer Webb said calmly, "along with Mr. Kim, who is the attorney of record for the defendant. Everything will be completely appropriate. This is highly irregular. So is a 9-year-old girl having evidence of judicial misconduct," Officer Webb replied. "I think we can bend procedure a little bit under the circumstances." Crawford opened his mouth to argue further, but the courtroom doors opened again, and Judge Sterling emerged. Everyone fell silent. Sterling looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past 20 minutes. His face was gray, his perfectly styled hair slightly disheveled, and there was a tremor in his hands that he was trying very hard to hide. When his eyes found Emma, the expression in them made her blood run cold. It wasn't anger. It was fear. "Mr. Crawford," Sterling said, his voice carefully controlled. "A word, please." Crawford hesitated, glancing between Sterling and Emma. Then he followed the judge down the hallway, and they disappeared around a corner. The moment they were gone, Kim grabbed Emma's hand. "We need to move, now, before they come back." Officer Webb led them to a stairwell, and they descended quickly to the second floor. The conference room he'd mentioned was small and windowless, with a table barely big enough for 4 people, and walls painted an industrial beige that seemed designed to suck the life out of any conversation. But it was private. Officer Webb closed the door and leaned against it. "You've got maybe 30 minutes before someone figures out where we went. Talk fast." Kim pulled out a chair for Emma, then sat down across from her. He had his laptop open before his butt hit the seat, his fingers already flying across the keyboard. "Okay, start from the beginning. What exactly did your father find?" Emma pulled the papers from her pocket and spread them on the table. There weren't many, just a few pages that had been folded and refolded so many times the creases were starting to tear. But each page represented hours of her father's careful investigation. "This is a newspaper article from 17 years ago," Emma said, pointing to the first page. "November 15th. A car accident on Highway 27. 2 cars. One driver dead, Sarah Mitchell, 28 years old. The other driver, she pulled out a second page, was listed as Thomas Brennan, age 42. Kim studied the article, his eyes scanning quickly. Okay, but I don't see Judge Sterling's name anywhere in this. That's because they changed it. Emma pulled out a third page, a photocopy of what looked like an internal police report. This is from the police investigation. My daddy had a friend who worked in records management. He helped him get copies. Look at the date stamp. Kim looked. His eyes widened. This is dated 3 days after the accident. But the signature at the bottom, that's dated a week later. And the ink color is different. Someone changed it, Emma said. Someone went back and altered the report after it was filed. Officer Webb had moved closer, reading over Kim's shoulder. How did your father even get access to this? His friend owed him a favor, Emma said. My daddy helped him with some tax stuff years ago. When my daddy started asking questions about the accident, his friend pulled the file. He noticed the discrepancy in the dates. He made copies before someone could lose the original. Kim was typing rapidly, pulling up what looked like newspaper archives on his laptop. Sarah Mitchell. Let me see what I can find. His fingers flew across the keyboard. Here, obituary. Survived by 2 children, Daniel, age 6, and Rebecca, age 4. Husband Michael Mitchell, listed as a construction foreman. Keep looking, Emma urged. Look for what happened to the family after. Kim scrolled through search results. Michael Mitchell died 2 years later. Heart attack, according to this. The children went into foster care. He paused, his face going pale. Oh my God. What? Officer Webb leaned in closer. Daniel Mitchell. Kim turned the laptop screen so they could see. He aged out of the foster system at 18, joined the military, served in Afghanistan. He clicked on another link. And currently works as head of security at Henderson and Associates Financial Services, Emma finished. The company where my daddy worked. The room went absolutely silent. Kim's fingers had stopped moving. Officer Webb had gone very still. They both stared at Emma with expressions of dawning horror and understanding. Daniel Mitchell, Kim said slowly, the son of the woman who died in the accident that Judge Sterling allegedly caused and covered up, works at the same company where your father was employed, where your father supposedly embezzled hundreds of thousands of dollars. Not supposedly, Emma said firmly. Someone did embezzle that money, just not my daddy. Officer Webb straightened up, his hand going to his radio. We need to get this to someone. Internal Affairs, the FBI, someone who can… Wait, Kim held up a hand. If we go to authorities now, with just this, they'll shut us down immediately. We have newspaper clippings and a photocopy of a police report that may or may not be authentic. We have circumstantial connections. We don't have proof. What about the blood alcohol test? Emma pulled out another page. The one that showed Thomas Brennan was drunk. My daddy found the original lab results. The blood sample wasn't Brennan's. The DNA didn't match. Kim took the paper, his hands shaking slightly. How could your father possibly know that? Because Thomas Brennan is dead, Emma said quietly. He died of cancer 3 years before the accident. My daddy tracked down his death certificate. Whoever was driving that car, it wasn't Thomas Brennan. Officer Webb let out a long breath. So someone used a dead man's identity to take the fall for the accident. And someone with enough power to alter police records, manipulate lab results, and make an entire investigation disappear, Kim added. He looked at Emma with something like awe. Your father figured all of this out? Emma felt tears pricking her eyes. He was trying to do the right thing. He found the connection between Daniel Mitchell and Judge Sterling. He realized that someone at his company, someone with access to client accounts, was working with Mitchell, maybe helping him, maybe being blackmailed by him. He started digging deeper. Her voice cracked. And that's when they arrested him. They framed him, Officer Webb said. It wasn't a question. They needed him discredited before he could expose what he'd found. A dying man accused of embezzlement? Who's going to believe him after that? Emma wiped her eyes roughly. And when he dies in prison, all his research dies with him. Case closed. Secret safe. Kim was staring at his laptop screen, but Emma could tell he wasn't really seeing it. His mind was working through the implications, the connections, the sheer scope of what they were dealing with. We need more, he finally said. We need something concrete, Something that directly links Daniel Mitchell to the embezzlement. Something that proves Judge Sterling was the actual driver. Something that... The door burst open. Mrs. Chen stood in the doorway, breathing hard like she'd been running. Her face was flushed, her gray hair coming loose from its bun, and she clutched her purse like it was a weapon. "Emma!" she gasped. "Thank God! I've been looking everywhere!" She stopped, taking in the scene. Kim with his laptop. Officer Webb by the door. The papers spread across the table. "What's happening?" "Mrs. Chen." Emma stood up, sudden hope flooding through her. "Mrs. Chen, you worked at the library for 30 years, right?" "Yes, but what does that..." "You have access to archives, old records, things that aren't digitized yet." Mrs. Chen's expression shifted from confusion to understanding. "The library keeps physical copies of all local newspapers going back 80 years. Court records, too, from before they went digital." Kim was already standing. "Can you get us in? Tonight? The library closed 2 hours ago, but..." Mrs. Chen pulled a keychain from her purse, and a small silver key caught the light. "I may have forgotten to turn in my master key when I retired." The bailiff shook his head, a smile tugging at his mouth despite the seriousness of the situation. "I'm not hearing this. I'm definitely not hearing about breaking and entering a public library." "It's not breaking and entering if you have a key," Mrs. Chen said primly. "It's just unofficial access." Emma looked between them all, Kim with his determination, Officer Webb with his conflicted loyalty to the law he'd sworn to uphold, Mrs. Chen with her unexpected streak of rebellion. These people, who barely knew each other hours ago, were coming together to fight for her father, to fight for the truth. "What about my daddy?" Emma asked. "They took him back to detention. He's alone. He doesn't know what's happening." Kim's expression softened. "Your father is safer where he is right now. If Sterling knows we're investigating, he can't touch anyone who's already in custody without raising massive red flags." "But he's sick," Emma whispered. "Every day in there is killing him." "Then we work fast." Kim started closing his laptop. "We have tonight to find whatever evidence exists in those archives. Tomorrow morning we take what we find to the State Attorney General's office. We go over Sterling's head, over Crawford's head, over everyone's head straight to the top." "And if we don't find anything?" Officer Webb asked. Kim looked at Emma, and she saw the same determination in his eyes that she'd seen in her father's when he was working on an impossible problem. "Then we make them look harder," Kim said, "because that little girl just stood up in open court and accused a federal judge of vehicular manslaughter. She either has the courage of the righteous, or she's the best liar I've ever seen. And I don't think she's a liar." Emma felt something warm spread through her chest. Someone believed her. Someone was actually listening. Officer Webb's radio crackled. A voice came through, official and urgent. "All units, be advised. Social Services has arrived. Locate minor Emma Sullivan and report to intake." Officer Webb reached down and turned off his radio. The gesture was small, but its meaning was enormous. He'd just chosen a side. He'd just decided that finding the truth was more important than following orders. "We've got maybe an hour before they realize I've gone dark," he said. "After that, they'll start looking for me too. We need to move." Mrs. Chen was already heading for the door. "My car is in the parking garage. We can be at the library in 15 minutes. Kim gathered his laptop and the papers, carefully folding Emma's evidence and handing it back to her. "Keep these safe. Don't let them out of your sight." Emma tucked them back into her pocket, feeling their weight against her hip. These few pages of paper were all that stood between her father and a life sentence, between truth and lies, between justice and corruption. No pressure. They moved quickly through the courthouse, taking back stairwells and service corridors that Mrs. Chen somehow knew about from her years of bringing book carts to the law library. They passed janitors who didn't look twice at them, slipped past security stations during shift changes, and finally emerged into the parking garage just as the sun was setting. Mrs. Chen's car was a 15-year-old sedan that had definitely seen better days. The passenger door stuck, the air conditioning made a concerning rattling noise, and one of the seats was held together with duct tape. It was perfect. They piled in, Mrs. Chen driving, Officer Webb in the passenger seat, Kim and Emma in the back. As they pulled out of the garage, Emma turned to look back at the courthouse. Up on the 7th floor, in a window she couldn't quite see clearly, she imagined her father sitting in a cell. alone, sick, probably thinking she'd been taken away by social services, that he'd never see her again. "I'm coming back for you, Daddy," Emma whispered against the window. "I promise. I'm going to fix this." Kim's hand settled gently on her shoulder. "We're going to fix this," he corrected. "Together." Emma nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The library loomed ahead of them, dark and imposing against the twilight sky. Somewhere in its archives was the proof they needed, the evidence that would bring down a judge, expose a conspiracy, and save her father. Emma just had to find it, and she had exactly one night to do it. The game had changed. Emma wasn't just a little girl anymore. She was a detective, a warrior, a daughter fighting for her father's life, and she wasn't going to stop until everyone knew the truth, no matter what it cost her. The Metropolitan Library stood like a sleeping giant against the night sky, its stone facade dark except for the emergency exit lights that glowed red at each corner. Mrs. Chen pulled her car into the empty parking lot, killing the engine but leaving them all sitting in darkness for a moment. "Last chance to back out," she said quietly. "What we're about to do could get us all arrested." "I'm already breaking about 6 departmental regulations," Officer Webb said. "Might as well add trespassing to the list." Kim looked at Emma in the rearview mirror. "You sure about this?" Emma thought about her father sitting in a detention cell, thought about the way his hands shook, the way his body was betraying him a little more each day, the way the light in his eyes dimmed every time she visited, thought about how he'd sold everything they owned to pay for her school supplies, how he'd worked himself to exhaustion so she could have birthday presents, how he'd never once complained, never once made her feel like a burden. "I'm sure," she said. They got out of the car quietly, the doors closing with soft clicks that seemed impossibly loud in the stillness. Mrs. Chen led them to a side entrance. A plain metal door painted the same gray as the stone walls, practically invisible if you didn't know where to look. The key turned smoothly in the lock. Inside, the library was a different world. During the day, it buzzed with activity. Children at story time, teenagers studying, elderly patrons reading newspapers, the constant whisper of pages turning and keyboards clicking. But at night, it was a cathedral of silence. Emergency lights cast long shadows between the stacks. The smell of old paper and leather bindings hung heavy in the air. Mrs. Chen moved through the darkness with the confidence of someone who'd walked these paths for 30 years. She led them past the main desk, through the reference section, down a narrow staircase that Emma had never noticed during her visits. The basement archive was exactly what Emma had imagined when she thought about secret libraries in movies. Row after row of floor-to-ceiling shelves, packed tight with bound newspapers, legal documents and file boxes labeled with dates going back decades. The air was cool and dry, preserved at the perfect temperature to keep paper from deteriorating. 17 years ago, Kim said, pulling out his phone and using the flashlight feature. "November. What exactly are we looking for?" "Court records," Emma said. "My daddy's notes mentioned a sealed file. Something about the accident investigation that got buried. He couldn't access it himself. You need special clearance, but he knew it existed." Mrs. Chen was already moving along the shelves, her fingers trailing across labels. "Sealed court records are kept separately. Over here." She stopped at a section in the far corner, protected by a locked gate. Officer Webb examined the lock. "I don't suppose you have a key for this, too?" "No," Mrs. Chen said, "but I know someone who does." She pulled out her phone, an old flip phone that looked like it had survived several disasters, and dialed a number. After 3 rings, a sleepy voice answered. "Harold, it's Margaret. I know it's late. I need a favor." She paused, listening. "The archive gate. Yes, tonight. It's important." Another pause. "Thank you. We'll wait." She hung up and turned to the others. "The night security guard, Harold Patterson. He's been working here longer than I did. He'll let us in, but we need to make this quick. He's risking his job just by opening that gate." They waited in tense silence. Emma's mind raced with possibilities and fears. What if the file had been destroyed? What if it didn't contain what they needed? What if they were risking everything for nothing? Footsteps echoed from the stairwell. Harold Patterson appeared, and Emma felt her breath catch. He was probably in his 70s, moving slowly with the help of a cane. His security uniform hung loose on a thin frame, and his face was creased with age and what looked like chronic pain. But it was his eyes that made Emma's heart stop. They were kind, impossibly, beautifully kind. The eyes of someone who'd spent a lifetime seeing people at their best and worst, and had somehow decided that kindness was still worth choosing. "Margaret," he said warmly, then nodded to the others. "And friends, you must need something pretty important to break into a library at this hour. We're trying to save an innocent man," Mrs. Chen said simply. Harold studied them each in turn. Officer Webb in his bailiff uniform, Kim with his laptop bag, Emma with her determined expression and faded dress. Whatever he saw seemed to satisfy him, because he pulled out a ring of keys and unlocked the gate. "You've got 1 hour," he said. "After that, I have to run my rounds. Can't have gaps in the security footage." They filed past him into the restricted section. The shelves here were different. Locked cabinets instead of open access, each one labeled with case numbers and dates. "November, 17 years ago," Kim muttered, scanning the labels. "Sealed cases. Here." He stopped at a cabinet marked with the right year. Locked. Harold was already there with another key. "Looking for anything specific?" "Traffic fatality," Emma said. "Highway 27, Sarah Mitchell." Harold's expression shifted. Just slightly, but Emma caught it. Recognition, and something else. Sadness. "You knew her," Emma whispered. Harold's hand paused on the cabinet door. Sarah Mitchell brought her children to story time every Thursday. Never missed a week. Her daughter Rebecca loved books about horses. Her son, Daniel, his voice caught. Daniel wanted to be a policeman when he grew up. Said he wanted to help people. The past tense hung heavy between them. "What happened to them?" Mrs. Chen asked gently. "After Sarah died? Father couldn't cope. Heart attack 2 years later. Kids went into the system." Harold's hands were shaking as he unlocked the cabinet. "Daniel came back once, years later. He'd just finished his military service. Wanted to know if we still had the books his mother used to read to him." Harold pulled out a thick file box. "We did. I gave them to him. And I gave him something else too." He reached into the cabinet and pulled out a second file, thinner, older, with a red seal across the front. "This," Harold said, his voice barely above a whisper, "is Sarah Mitchell's personal investigation file. The one her husband Michael started before he died. The one Daniel finished. The one that proves Judge Victor Sterling was driving drunk the night Sarah died." The room went completely silent. Kim's hands trembled as he reached for the file. "Why would you have this? Why wouldn't Daniel—" "Because Daniel gave it to me for safekeeping," Harold said. "He knew he couldn't keep it himself. Knew someone would find it, destroy it. So he gave it to an old librarian who everyone assumed was too senile to remember what he had." Harold's eyes met Emma's, and she saw the terrible weight of secrets in them. "Daniel Mitchell isn't a villain, child. He's a son who watched his mother die and his father break apart and spent his whole life trying to find justice for them. And when he finally had the proof he needed," Harold's voice cracked, "he realized that taking down Sterling legally would destroy too many other lives. Sterling's wife, his children, the families who depended on the cases he'd ruled on fairly over the years. So he did nothing." Officer Webb's voice was sharp with disbelief. "So he tried to find another way," Harold corrected. "He started working at Henderson and Associates, started watching, waiting, looking for proof of other crimes Sterling might have committed, evidence that could bring him down without destroying innocent people." Emma's mind was racing, pieces clicking into place like her father's accounting spreadsheets when all the numbers finally balanced. "And then my daddy started investigating the same thing," she said slowly. "Started finding the same connections. Daniel must have thought that your father was going to expose everything before Daniel was ready," Kim finished. "So he framed him, made him look guilty to buy more time." "No," Harold shook his head firmly. "Daniel didn't frame your father. Daniel was trying to help him. They were working together." The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. "What?" Emma's voice came out as a squeak. Harold opened the file, pulling out page after page of documents, bank records, emails, meeting notes, all in her father's familiar handwriting. "Your father and Daniel were partners," Harold said. "They'd been collaborating for months. Robert had the accounting skills to track the money. Daniel had the security access to find the physical evidence. Together, They'd built a case that could bring down not just Sterling, but the entire network of corruption around him. Mrs. Chen grabbed the edge of the table for support. Then who framed Robert? Harold pulled out one final document. A photograph, printed on regular paper, slightly grainy but clear enough. It showed Judge Victor Sterling shaking hands with a man in an expensive suit. The photo was dated 6 months ago, and the man Sterling was shaking hands with was Benjamin Crawford, Kim breathed. The prosecutor. Sterling's stepson, Harold confirmed. Changed his name years ago to avoid nepotism accusations. But he's been protecting his stepfather for decades, and when he found out Robert and Daniel were investigating, he did what he had to do. He framed Robert using his access to the prosecutor's office, made it look like embezzlement, destroyed all of Robert's evidence, and made sure the case went before Sterling himself so they could control the outcome. Emma felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. Then Daniel is currently being held in the same detention center as your father, Harold said quietly. Crawford arrested him this afternoon. Same charges. Embezzlement. They're destroying everyone who knows the truth. Officer Webb's radio crackled suddenly, making everyone jump. A voice came through. All units, be advised. Arrest warrant issued for Officer Marcus Webb. Failure to comply with direct orders. Considered armed and dangerous. Apprehend on sight. Webb reached down and turned off his radio for the second time that day. His face was pale but determined. They're moving fast. They're scared, Kim said, already photographing every page in Harold's files with his phone. We got too close. Emma's whole body had gone cold. Her father and Daniel had been working together. They'd almost succeeded, and now they were both locked up, both facing life in prison for crimes they didn't commit, while the real criminals sat in positions of power. We need to get this to someone, Mrs. Chen said. Someone who can't be bought or threatened. The State Attorney General, Kim said. But it's almost 9 p.m. Office is closed. Earliest we can get there is tomorrow morning at 8. That's 11 hours, Officer Webb said. 11 hours for Crawford and Sterling to figure out what we're doing and shut us down. Harold had moved to his security desk, pulling up camera feeds on an old monitor. His face went gray. We have a more immediate problem. They crowded around the monitor. The grainy black and white footage showed the library's front entrance. 3 police cars were pulling into the parking lot. They tracked Mrs. Chen's car, Kim said, or Webb's phone, or... It doesn't matter how, Harold cut him off. What matters is you have maybe 2 minutes before they get inside. He reached into his desk and pulled out a set of keys. Take these. There's a service tunnel that connects the library to the courthouse next door, built in the 1940s for document transfer. Exit comes out in the courthouse basement parking garage. Harold, if you help us, you'll lose everything, Mrs. Chen protested. Margaret, I'm 76 years old. I've got stage 3 cancer that the doctors say will kill me in 6 months. Harold's smile was gentle and sad. What exactly do I have to lose? Emma looked at this old man who was willing to sacrifice everything for people he barely knew, for a truth that most people had forgotten or never cared about. And suddenly she understood something her father had tried to teach her. Heroism wasn't about being strong or powerful or fearless. It was about choosing to do the right thing even when it cost you everything. Thank you, Emma whispered, and she meant it with her whole heart. Patterson knelt down, the movement clearly painful, and looked Emma directly in the eyes. Your father is a good man, one of the best I've ever known. You tell him that when you see him again. You tell him Harold said he's proud to have known him. Tears were streaming down Emma's face now. I will. I promise. Footsteps echoed from the main level. Voices calling out. The police were inside. Go, Harold said, pressing the keys into Kim's hand. Service tunnel is behind the staff break room. Follow it all the way to the end. Don't stop. Don't look back. They ran. Through the stacks, past the archive, into a small break room that smelled like old coffee. Officer Webb found the tunnel entrance behind a filing cabinet and pulled it open. Darkness yawned beyond. I'll seal it behind you, Harold called. Buy you time. Emma was the last one through. She turned back to see Harold already pushing the filing cabinet back into place, his face peaceful despite the pain the movement clearly caused him. Harold, she called. He paused, looking at her through the narrowing gap. I'll make sure everyone knows what you did, Emma said. I'll make sure your story gets told. Harold's smile was worth every risk. Make sure your father's story gets told, child. That's all that matters. The cabinet scraped shut, leaving them in complete darkness. They ran through the tunnel, their footsteps echoing off stone walls that hadn't seen maintenance in decades. The air was stale and thick. The darkness was absolute except for the glow of Kim's phone flashlight. Behind them, muffled shouts. The sound of the cabinet being moved. Pursuit. They ran faster. The tunnel seemed endless, stretching into darkness that swallowed Kim's light. Emma's lungs burned, her legs ached, but she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Because her father was counting on her. Because Harold had given them a chance. Because the truth was finally within reach. The tunnel ended at a metal ladder leading up to a hatch. Officer Webb climbed first, testing the hatch. It opened with a groan of protesting metal. They emerged into the courthouse parking garage, gasping for breath, covered in dust from the tunnel. Mrs. Chen's car was gone. Impounded, probably, or surrounded by police. They were fugitives now, all of them, running from the very law they were trying to uphold. But they had the truth, and in 11 hours, they would expose everything, if they could survive that long. Emma clutched the copies of Harold's files that Kim had made, feeling their weight against her chest. This paper, these fragile pages, were worth more than gold. They were proof, justice, hope. They were her father's freedom, and she would protect them with her life. The courthouse parking garage was a concrete labyrinth of shadows and echoes. Every footstep seemed amplified, every breath too loud. Emma pressed herself against the cold wall, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. "We can't use my apartment," Mrs. Chen whispered. "They'll have it staked out already." "Mine too," Kim added, his voice tight with stress. "Crawford knows where I live." Officer Webb was scanning the garage, his training kicking in despite being on the wrong side of the law for the first time in his career. "We need somewhere public, crowded, somewhere they can't grab us without witnesses." "The bus station," Mrs. Chen said suddenly. 24-hour diner attached. Security cameras everywhere. Too many people coming and going for them to make a scene. They moved quickly through the garage, staying in the shadows, avoiding the security cameras that Webb pointed out with practiced ease. Emma clutched the folder of evidence against her chest, feeling the weight of everything Harold had given them. His sacrifice, his trust, his final act of rebellion against corruption. A car engine roared to life somewhere above them. "Move!" Webb pushed them toward the exit just as headlights swept across the level they'd been standing on moments before. They burst out onto the street, the night air hitting Emma's face like a slap. The bus station was 6 blocks away. They walked fast, but not running. Running drew attention. Mrs. Chen looped her arm through Emma's, and to anyone watching, they looked like a grandmother taking her granddaughter home. Kim and Webb walked ahead, looking like colleagues leaving work late. But Emma could feel eyes on them, could sense the net closing. The diner was exactly as Mrs. Chen described. Harsh fluorescent lights, cracked vinyl booths, the smell of coffee and grease. A handful of night shift workers scattered throughout, too exhausted to pay attention to anyone else. A bored waitress reading a magazine behind the counter. They slid into a corner booth where they could see both entrances. "Now what?" Mrs. Chen asked, accepting a coffee that Kim had ordered to avoid suspicion. Kim pulled out his phone, careful to angle it so the folder was hidden from view. "I've been texting my law school roommate. She works for the Attorney General's office now. She can get us in tomorrow morning, but..." He paused, checking a new message. "She says Crawford is already spreading word that we've kidnapped Emma, that we're dangerous extremists who attacked a federal judge." "Of course he is," Webb muttered. "Classic tactic. Discredit us before we can tell our story." Emma stared at the evidence folder, all of Harold's careful documentation, the photos, the sealed court files, the proof of everything, and suddenly she understood what they were missing. "It's not enough," she said quietly. 3 pairs of eyes turned to her. "What do you mean?" Kim asked. Emma opened the folder, spreading the pages across the table but keeping them low, hidden from casual view. "This proves that Sterling caused the accident, that he covered it up, that Crawford is his stepson. But it doesn't prove that my daddy is innocent. It doesn't show how Crawford framed him." Kim started to object, then stopped. His expression shifted from defensive to thoughtful. "She's right. We have proof of Sterling's crime. But the embezzlement case against Robert is separate. Crawford will argue they're not connected, that Robert is still guilty even if Sterling is too. We need Daniel Mitchell, Webb said. He's the only one who can testify about working with Robert, who can prove they were building a case together, not stealing. Daniel's in detention, Mrs. Chen pointed out. Same place as Robert, probably in isolation. No visitors allowed. Webb's jaw tightened. Then we break him out. The words hung in the air like a dare. Kim laughed, a short, slightly hysterical sound. You want to break a prisoner out of federal detention? Do you hear yourself? I worked courthouse security for 8 years before transferring to bailiff duty, Webb said calmly. I know that building. I know the routines. I know the blind spots in the camera coverage. He leaned forward. And I know that the night shift changes at 11 p.m. For exactly 15 minutes, there's a gap when the new guards are getting briefed and the old ones are checking out. 15 minutes when no one is actively monitoring the isolation wing. That's in, Kim checked his phone, 42 minutes. Exactly. Mrs. Chen set down her coffee cup with a decisive click. Then we'd better get moving. Kim stared at her. Margaret, you can't be serious. This is insane. We're talking about committing a felony. Multiple felonies. Joseph, Mrs. Chen said, using his first name for the first time. I've spent 71 years following rules, playing it safe, doing what I was told. And you know what I learned? Her eyes were fierce. The system only works for people who already have power. Everyone else just gets ground up. She reached across the table and took Emma's hand. This child's father is dying in a cell for a crime he didn't commit. Harold Patterson is probably being arrested right now for helping us. Daniel Mitchell is locked up for trying to find justice for his murdered mother. How many more good people have to be sacrificed before we say enough? The waitress walked past, refilling coffee cups. They all fell silent until she moved on. I'm in, Kim said quietly. I'm already disbarred after tonight anyway. Might as well make it count. Webb was already sketching a rough map on a napkin. Detention center has 3 entrances. Main, service, and emergency fire exit. Emergency exit has an alarm, but, he smiled grimly. If someone were to pull the fire alarm on the opposite end of the building, the guards would assume any other alarms were part of the same malfunction. What about getting Daniel out once we reach him? Mrs. Chen asked. I still have my security credentials, Webb said. They won't have deactivated them yet. Takes 24 to 48 hours to process through the system. I can access the isolation wing. The question is getting him out of the building once we've freed him. Emma had been thinking while they talked, her mind working through the problem the way her father had taught her to approach difficult accounting puzzles. Break it down into pieces. Find the pattern. Follow the numbers. The laundry service, she said. They all turned to her. What? Webb asked. The detention center contracts with an outside laundry service. Huge truck comes every night to pick up the day's linens and drop off clean ones. I saw it when I visited my daddy. Emma's words came faster as the plan took shape. The truck parks at the service entrance. Takes them 20 minutes to load and unload. If someone were in one of those big laundry bins, they could wheel right past security, Webb finished, his eyes lighting up. The guards never check the laundry. It's beneath their notice. Kim was already on his phone, searching. Service entrance is on the north side, less visible from the street. If we can create a distraction at the main entrance— Fire alarm, Mrs. Chen said. Pull it at the main entrance. Guards rush there. You go in through service, get Daniel, hide him in the laundry, and walk him right out. It was a terrible plan. 12 things could go wrong, 100 things. But it was the only plan they had. Webb checked his watch. 35 minutes. We need to move now. They left money on the table, too much, but they couldn't wait for change, and headed back into the night. The detention center was only 8 blocks from the bus station. Close enough to walk, far enough to feel like miles. Emma walked between Mrs. Chen and Kim, her mind racing. In less than an hour, she might see her father again, might be able to tell him that they'd found the proof, that Harold had sacrificed everything, that the truth was finally coming out, or they'd all be arrested, locked up, the evidence confiscated and buried forever. 3 police cars passed them, sirens silent but lights flashing. Searching. Don't look, Webb murmured. Keep walking normally. Emma forced herself to breathe, to put one foot in front of the other, to trust these people who'd risked everything for a little girl and a father they barely knew. The detention center loomed ahead, A brutal concrete building with narrow windows and too much razor wire. Emma had been here a dozen times to visit her father, each time feeling smaller and more powerless. Not tonight. Tonight, she was taking power back. Webb split off from the group, circling toward the service entrance. Kim pulled a baseball cap low over his face. Mrs. Chen gripped Emma's hand tighter. "When I was a little girl," Mrs. Chen whispered as they approached the main entrance, "my mother told me that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being terrified and doing the right thing anyway." Emma squeezed her hand. "Your mother sounds wise." "She was a librarian too," Mrs. Chen smiled. "It runs in the family." They reached the entrance. Through the glass doors, Emma could see the security desk. Two guards chatting, looking bored. A clock on the wall showing 10:57 p.m. 3 minutes. Kim positioned himself near the fire alarm, pretending to read something on his phone. Mrs. Chen and Emma walked past, circling the building toward where Webb should be waiting. 2 minutes. Emma's heart was a drum. Her hands were shaking. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to let adults handle this. But adults had created this mess. Adults had let corruption flourish. Adults had decided that some lives mattered more than others. 1 minute. Webb appeared from the shadows, his face grim. Laundry truck just arrived, right on schedule. Mrs. Chen checked her phone. Joseph is in position. 30 seconds. Emma closed her eyes and thought of her father. Thought of Harold. Thought of Sarah Mitchell's children who'd grown up without their mother. Thought of every person who'd ever been crushed by a system that protected the powerful and punished the vulnerable. 10 seconds. The fire alarm shattered the night. Inside the building, chaos erupted. Guards running, voices shouting, confusion spreading like wildfire. Webb moved. He swiped his security card at the service entrance, and the door opened smoothly. The loading dock was ahead, the laundry truck backed up to the bay, its driver smoking a cigarette and scrolling through his phone, completely oblivious to the commotion at the front of the building. Webb disappeared into the detention center. Emma and Mrs. Chen waited in the shadows. Every second, an eternity. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. The fire alarm shut off. Guards would be returning to their posts. The window was closing. "Come on," Emma whispered. "Come on, come on, come on." 15 minutes. The service door opened. Webb emerged, walking normally, professionally, pushing a large laundry bin. Behind him, a detention center worker Emma didn't recognize pushed another bin. They loaded both bins onto the truck. The worker went back inside. Webb stayed, talking to the driver, gesturing casually like he was making small talk. The truck's engine rumbled to life. Webb walked away, not looking back, not running, just another guard finishing his shift. The truck pulled away from the loading dock. Mrs. Chen's phone buzzed. A text from Webb. "Package delivered. Meet at the park." Emma felt tears of relief streaming down her face. They'd done it. They'd actually done it. Inside one of those laundry bins was Daniel Mitchell, and in less than 10 hours they would walk into the Attorney General's office with everything they needed to destroy Sterling's empire of lies. But first, they had to survive the night, and Sterling had just realized what they'd done. The park was empty at midnight. Emma sat between Mrs. Chen and Kim, exhausted but alert. Officer Webb stood watch. Daniel Mitchell emerged from the shadows. He was thin, tired, but his eyes burned with determination. He knelt before Emma. "Your father talks about you constantly. You're all he thinks about." Emma's throat tightened. "Is he okay?" "Barely holding on," Daniel said gently. "But fighting. Always for you." Kim showed Daniel the evidence on his phone. Harold's files, the sealed documents, everything. Daniel's hands shook, viewing the proof. "Harold chose this," Webb said quietly. Daniel closed his eyes. "You're 9 years old. You should be worried about homework, not fighting corruption. My daddy shouldn't be dying in prison for crimes he didn't commit," Emma said, tears streaming. "Sometimes we don't choose our fights." "You're exactly like Robert," Daniel said. "Brilliant, and braver than you know." "I'm terrified every second," Emma admitted. "But I promised I'd make it right." Kim outlined the plan. "Attorney General's office opens at 8. We present everything together. Crawford will have police waiting," Webb warned. "Let him arrest us in front of witnesses and cameras," Mrs. Chen said firmly. Let him show everyone who he really is. Emma spoke quietly. I need to see my daddy first. Visiting hours start at 7. They'll arrest you immediately, Kim protested. Good, Emma said with steel in her voice. Let them drag a little girl from her dying father. Let everyone see what they're protecting. Understanding settled over the group. This wasn't just strategy. This was a daughter possibly saying goodbye. We all go, Mrs. Chen said. Daniel pulled out a photograph, his mother Sarah with her children. My mom said the measure of a person is what they do when everything's falling apart. Your father never gave up. Now you're fighting for him. That's love. Emma studied the face of the woman who'd changed everything. I'm sorry about your mom. I'll make sure she didn't die for nothing, Daniel whispered. Hours passed. Kim contacted news organizations. Webb reached trusted officers. Daniel shared stories about Robert, their partnership, their careful investigation, Robert's insistence on doing everything legally. He's one of the best men I've known, Daniel said as dawn approached. He's about to get justice, Emma whispered. At 6:45 a.m., they walked toward the detention center. No more hiding. 5 people who'd risked everything for truth. The lobby was full, families, lawyers, witnesses. Crawford stood near security with 4 officers. There she is, Crawford announced. The kidnapped child. Arrest them. But Emma stood calmly, holding Mrs. Chen's hand, fearless. I wasn't kidnapped, Emma said clearly. These people are helping my daddy, the man you framed. Phones appeared. Recording started. My father is innocent, Emma continued. We have proof Judge Sterling caused a fatal accident 17 years ago and covered it up. Proof you're his stepson. Proof you framed my father and Daniel Mitchell. Crawford's face paled. Officers, silence her. Silence a 9-year-old? Mrs. Chen's voice rang out. In front of cameras? Show everyone what you'll do to protect lies. The officers hesitated, doubt crossing their faces. The doors burst open. Judge Victor Sterling entered, looking shattered. His eyes found Emma. Shame. Benjamin, enough, Sterling said quietly. Father, I can handle. No more lies. Sterling's voice cracked like thunder. No more destroying innocent people. He approached Emma. Every eye followed. You said if I let your father go, you'd make me walk, Sterling said, hands shaking. I thought you were delusional. Emma pulled out a medical report. My daddy studied medicine before I was born. He never stopped learning. She handed him the paper. You have progressive nerve compression. Your doctors say you'll lose the ability to walk. Sterling trembled. How? My daddy found a new treatment while researching his own condition. He realized you have the same thing. Emma's voice dropped. He was going to tell you, even after everything, because he's a good person who doesn't want anyone to suffer, not even those who hurt him. Sterling made a sound between a sob and a gasp. He dropped to his knees in the middle of the lobby, a federal judge breaking completely. I'm sorry, he wept. Robert Sullivan tried to save me and I tried to destroy him. What have I done? Webb's hand landed on Crawford's shoulder. You're not going anywhere. The doors opened again. News cameras, reporters, Attorney General staff drawn by live streams spreading across social media. But Emma only saw one person. Her father appeared in his wheelchair, pushed by a guard. Robert Sullivan looked like death itself, until he saw Emma. Then pure joy transformed his face. Daddy! Emma ran, finally feeling his arms around her. Safe. Loved. My brave girl, Robert whispered. What did you do? I kept my promise. I found the truth. Sterling knelt weeping. Crawford in handcuffs. Cameras rolling. Truth finally exposed. Days later, Sterling resigned and confessed everything. Crawford fought, but evidence overwhelmed him. Robert and Daniel were exonerated completely. Robert got the treatment. Not a cure, but hope. Time to see Emma grow up. The story went viral. Millions watched. Millions learned that sometimes the smallest voices speak the loudest truths. Harold was released, all charges dropped, honored at the press conference. Weeks later, Emma sat with her father in the park. His hands still shook, but his eyes were bright with life. You did it, Robert said. We did it, Emma corrected. Together. Across the park, Mrs. Chen waved. Officer Webb stood with her, being honored despite personal cost. Daniel Mitchell was finally at peace, his mother's memory honored. What do you want to be when you grow up? Robert asked. Emma thought about courtrooms, evidence, truth. about fighting for people everyone else abandoned. A lawyer, Emma replied. Someone who fights for people everyone's given up on. Robert smiled through tears. You're already doing that, sweetheart. The sun set over the city, painting sky in gold and crimson. Somewhere, Sterling began treatment, saved by the man he'd tried to destroy. Crawford learned justice always finds its mark. Harold's story was preserved in library records for history. But here, with her father's hand in hers and her chosen family surrounding her, Emma Sullivan was exactly where she needed to be. She'd made a promise, and kept it. The truth came out. Justice prevailed. And love, fierce, unbreakable, unconditional love, won.